as Peter said there, people have abandoned warehouses in China. And we've heard on this podcast previously that some SME shippers in the US are talking about going out on business, or they're turning up at ports and they just simply can't, they don't have the cash flow to pay for the extra duty on their products. Some are getting sent back, some are getting abandoned. And this isn't just about imports from China, because obviously we have tariffs in place on other countries as well, most other countries, in fact, all of them. So maybe you can speak to that, but could you also explain to our listeners how the practicalities of this work when, say, parts of products are judged under different tariffs, either because of origin or because it's aluminum or because it's electronics from China, for example, rather than falling under a different category and therefore isn't exempt. There's a lot to keep on top of. Can you just give us a bit of a flavor of that?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. I'm a customs broker by trade. I've been, a customs broker for 35 years. I have never seen it this chaotic in trying to understand how to properly assess duty. Automation took over 25 years ago, and most customs brokers, when I started, we had to know how to calculate duty. We were doing it manually in some cases, and automation has slowly taken over that role. So there's very few of us left who can actually manually calculate duty and deduct certain things and have it come out right. Unfortunately, one of the challenges we've seen at U.S. Customs and Border Protection is their ACE system that I had responsibility for is having a hard time calculating the duty that's stacked. And I know John Gold in your last podcast did a fantastic job of outlining each of the tariffs. But if we look at, I like to use a polyester dress from China. Polyester dress from China has 16% regular duty, so you have to pay that. You have the original 301 duty that Trump put in his first administration, that's 7.5. You have the first IEEPA, which is the Emergency Powers Act that was put on, we call them the fentanyl tariffs, that's 20%. Then you have the IEEPA reciprocal tariffs, that's 125%. So all in, it's 168.5% that someone has to pay as of Liberation Day that they didn't before. One of the other issues is May 2nd, and I know we're going to get into this in a little bit more detail later. May 2nd, anything under $800 from China is not allowed to clear under the de minimis threshold. So that dresses that are, $25 today come in free. After May 3rd and on, they're going to have to pay 168.5% duty. And is that viable for U.S. businesses? Is it viable for U.S. consumers? And for the most part, a lot of these companies are doing the math and they're saying no. I have a company that I buy vanilla bean pods from. It's a mail order business. And of course, I buy it because it's high quality. It's high quality because it comes from Madagascar. So Madagascar has something like 45% duty on it now. And this small company who started as a aluminum container source company, those containers, spice containers that are magnetic,
Yeah.
and you put it on the board. Well, she started importing those. And so she imported the magnetic aluminum containers. And then she started importing all the spices to go in it because people were like, hey, we'd love to, buy spices from you. Great business opportunity. She started sourcing spices from all around the world. And I love the vanilla bean pods, highest quality. She is pausing her business. One, because she can't afford the aluminum with the aluminum tariffs. She sources those from China. So if you look at aluminum containers, you're up to the 160 some percent as well on the aluminum containers. And then she'll have the Madagascar vanilla beans will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 60%. So she has sent out an email to all of her customers and said, I can't afford this. I have 1 to 3 months of product in stock. And if I ordered today, my order is going to hit after all of these changes happen. And I can't afford that. So I'm going to pause and wait to see what happens in 90 days. And then I might source. So people are pausing. They have 1 to 3 months of stock in place. They're fulfilling orders in whether they're a small business or a large company, they're fulfilling orders from their warehouses. We saw some large companies that were actually bringing in goods in advance. You know, we saw that high peak in air freight shipping, as Brandon Fried had talked about. There's an announcement. You have a high volume of air freight shipping coming in advance of that, and then it settles back down. We saw, you know, shipping increase. So I think that people have brought in their goods, and now it's like hunker down and see what's going to happen. They are, you know, they are carrying on and staying calm. But I've seen a lot of companies, especially in the small to medium size environment, just pausing on
Yeah.
sourcing.
Real
It's
people and real businesses, and they're struggling because of this. And of course, that's the sort of product that can't be reshored in any way, shape, or form. Just back on customs and border protection, can you give me any idea of how what they're trying to do to keep on top of this in terms of that ACE system? And I guess there's just a lot of man hours going into this, isn't there? Or people hours?
Yeah, there's a lot of people hours, especially in the automation and ACE. You know, my friends, my former colleagues in the ACE system, they are furiously doing changes to the systems. And as we talked before, you know, Mike, the normal process for development is you get the requirements, you do the coding, you do testing, you do integration testing, you do external testing, you do cert testing, and then you put it into production. That cycle usually takes weeks, if not months, depending on the type of changes that you're making. ACE has had to make these in a matter of days sometimes, and at the most a matter of weeks, and they are struggling to make these changes. As well, that stacking duty rate that I talked about for the polyester dress, ACE can't calculate more than 2 rates of duty at a time together. So what's happening today is the customs brokers are now manually calculating this, and the systems that they use are manually calculating the duty rates and sending it to customs. And customs has to manually calculate if they want to check it. So they're accepting it as true, but down the road, they'll have to check that in a manual way because their systems, it's, you know, it's a 30-year-old system now, and it cannot calculate the duty rates that effectively. So you have a couple of different impacts. One, you know, the poor folks at ACE that are trying to make these changes sometimes in days without a lot of cert testing, without a lot of upfront ability to ensure that it works properly. And then you have things that simply just cannot do, that will fall on the import specialist to manually calculate at a time when the administration is pushing for massive enforcement to make sure that there's no fraud, to make sure there's no transshipment, to make sure that there is no ability to not pay the right amount of tariffs. So there are going to be some impacts. I don't see shipments stacking up at the border because the customs brokers are transmitting the information. Customs has an automated way to look at the information to determine that, do I want to release this into the commerce of the United States? That's really not been impacted. And I don't think it will be. I think what's going to happen is after the fact, when people are trying to ascertain if that information was correct, that's going to be the huge impact on customs. Plus this massive pressure to enforce when they are understaffed already. We're understaffed when this administration came in, and a lot of folks in DHS just got a letter from the DOGE effort encouraging folks to take early retirement. So it's a juxtaposition that just doesn't make sense. Do more work, do it better with less tools and less people. So we'll see. My hearts go out to my former colleagues because this is really hard for them. They are the enforcer. They don't have a say in what policy decisions are being made, but it's their job to enforce it. So I have sympathy for them.
Well, it must be tough at the moment. I'll bring Peter back in a second, but I'll just do de minimis exemptions on goods imported of less than $800 from China, 2nd of May. You mentioned it there because there's a few other things going on that I sort of see as linked. FedEx and UPS have implemented surcharges for US bound parcels already, but DHL Express has now halted business to consumer of consumer shipments for customs value of products over $800 due to all the extra documentation. It did say it would try to help customers understand and adapt to these changes from the 2nd of May. Now, we've also got Hong Kong Post has stopped handling US packages. Can you give us any insights into how all of this comes together and what sort of extra documentation all of this is involved and what happens post 2nd of May in your view, just briefly?
Yeah, so I like to use, for example, aluminum toy trucks from China. So you have an aluminum toy truck. Today it's valued at $50. It comes in on de minimis. Somebody orders it. It comes in on de minimis. It's just delivered. You have to have an invoice that says, this is a toy truck. It's made of aluminum, country of origin, China. It's valued at $50. Here's who's shipping it, and here's where it's going to. That's the information that you need for a de minimis shipment. On May 3rd, this same aluminum truck is going to have the information on where the aluminum was cast and smelt, how much that aluminum value is, because it's not the tariffs on aluminum, which would apply after May 3rd, don't apply to any non-aluminum or non-steel parts. So if it's $50 and 25 of it is 25% of that is aluminum, the value, you only pay the aluminum tariffs on that value, but you have to know that. You have to know how much of that toy is aluminum. Then you have to know the value. Then you have to know the cast and smelt of that aluminum, which I can guarantee you most toy companies in China don't understand that. Then you have to understand who's the manufacturer of that, which before you just needed to know the shipper. If there's a different buyer than the consignee who it's actually going to, so if there's a middleman in there, you have to know that. So all of this information is required on May 3rd. And that is why we see some of these actions that are required, because the amount of information that is needed on May 3rd going forward is much more detailed on the product level than it was under the de minimis exemption. So that is some of the challenges that the FedExes, the DHLs, the UPSs. The Postal Service is something a little bit different. The Postal Service for de minimis went to a flat rate. It's a flat rate per package, or it is a flat rate based on the value. Most mail moves into the United States on commercial aircraft. There is no China Post Airline. There is no Australia Post Airline. It is contracted to commercial carriers. And the executive order said that on May 3rd, that the commercial carriers would have to collect the duty and pay it to the U.S. government. So we talked about, the last time about the pause, there was this China de minimis is withdrawn, then there was a pause on that until the systems could be put in place. Well, the system was really the ability to collect and pay duty in the Postal Service. So China Post likely does not have an ability to either collect the duty up front to pay the carrier, or the carriers have said, we are not collecting the duty. We'll pay it to customs because we have to, but we don't have the ability to pay the duty. So I don't know what the strategy for other countries are right now. Those commercial carriers are looking at that with each individual, lane that they handle specifically for China and Hong Kong Post. But they have to be able to collect that duty somehow and pay it to U.S. Customs. So I think that Hong Kong, we're going to see a lot more of that. We're going to see carriers saying, I'm not in the position to collect duty unless the Postal Service can collect the duty. And we'll see if they are in that position. I don't know if China Post is in a position to be able to collect duty